You're trespassing. Step away from community property. That's what the HOA Karen told me while standing on the ranch my family has owned since 1952. I just returned from an 18-month Army deployment, dust still on my boots, duffel bag in the back of my pickup. I pull up to the gate of my family's 200-acre ranch, and a spotless white Mercedes is blocking the entrance. She's already on the phone with 911. "Officer, there's a man refusing to leave our property." Sirens started echoing down the valley. I walked toward her, holding the original deed my grandfather filed decades before her entire subdivision even existed. She kept smiling, confident, certain I was about to be arrested. She had no idea that one phone call would trigger a legal battle that would destroy everything she'd built. What would you do if strangers tried to steal your family's ranch? Where are you watching from? Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. Stone Creek Ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather, tough old bird named Frank Stone, homesteaded this land back in 1952 with nothing but grit and a handshake deal with the county. 200 acres of prime Texas hill country, rolling pastures, original growth timber, and a natural creek that runs clear and cold year-round. I'm 3rd-generation Army Corps of Engineers trained in infrastructure, water rights, and land surveying. The military taught me precision, documentation, and how to think 3 steps ahead. Skills that were about to come in real handy. The ranch isn't just pretty scenery. We run cattle, host the county fair every summer. And my workshop has pulled more neighbors out of mechanical trouble than I can count. When Mrs. Rodriguez's tractor broke down during harvest, guess who spent his weekend fixing it for free? When the Hendersons needed hay after the drought in 2019, guess whose barn doors stayed open? But 3 years ago, everything started changing. Bradley Whitfield's development company built Meadowbrook Estates, this luxury subdivision right next to our property line. Big houses, manicured lawns, and HOA rules thicker than a phone book. The houses sold fast to city folks wanting the country lifestyle without any actual country responsibilities. Karen Whitfield, Bradley's wife, made herself HOA president before the paint dried on the first house. 45 years old, former pharmaceutical sales rep, drives that white Mercedes like it's a weapon. She's got this way of using words, like community standards and property values, that makes your skin crawl. The trouble started small. Karen would drive by our fence line taking pictures. Then came the complaints to the county about our unsightly agricultural operations. The smell of fresh hay and leather in the barn mixing with that chemical odor from new construction told the whole story. Old Texas bumping up against suburban entitlement. When I got back from deployment last month, I found HOA violation notices taped to my front door. $500 a day in fines for unauthorized livestock operations in a residential zone. My cattle, Roosevelt the bull and his ladies, were apparently violating someone's aesthetic sensibilities. Mrs. Rodriguez, bless her heart, filled me in over coffee. That HOA woman's been here 3 times, mijo, measuring things, taking pictures, asking questions about your water rights. The rough wooden gate post where Grandpa carved Stone Creek 1952 had fresh scratches around it, like someone had been trying to remove his handiwork. But Karen's opening move was pure genius in an evil mastermind kind of way. She'd hired a surveyor to reestablish proper boundary lines and filed a complaint claiming our ranch access road fell under HOA jurisdiction, the same road Grandpa built in 1952, maintained by the county for 70 years. 2 days after I got home, Karen rolled up with some lawyer in a shiny BMW. Got out like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, demanding we remove all livestock within 48 hours or face significant legal consequences. I stood there in my work jeans and boots, looking at this woman in her business suit, telling me to get rid of cattle that had been grazing this land since before she was born. Roosevelt, my prize bull, chose that exact moment to lumber over to the fence and stare at her Mercedes, like it had personally offended him. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level, "this ranch has been operating under agricultural exemption since 1952. We're grandfathered under county zoning." Karen's smile got sharper. "Not according to our community attorney. This entire area is now residential. Your little hobby farm is bringing down property values for legitimate homeowners." Hobby farm. 70 years of Stone family sweat and sacrifice. And she called it a hobby farm. As they drove away, kicking up dust with their fancy cars, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Karen had just declared war on the wrong veteran. Karen didn't waste time escalating. Within a week, she'd filed formal complaints with the county claiming our ranch violated residential zoning laws. Then, she hired her own surveyor, some guy in pressed khakis, who'd never seen a day of honest work, to reestablish proper boundaries. But here's where Karen's city girl ignorance started showing. She spread rumors at the country club that our ranch was an unsanitary health hazard, apparently not realizing that half the country club members buy their beef from ranches just like ours. The rumor mill works both ways in small towns, and word got back to me fast. The real kicker, Karen sent certified letters to all our neighbors encouraging them to file noise complaints about cattle operations that had been running peacefully for decades. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me a copy, shaking her head. "This woman's got more nerve than a toothache," she said. "Which in Texas means you've really crossed a line." Now, the Army taught me that when someone attacks, you don't just defend, you gather intelligence. So, I spent 3 days at the county courthouse digging through property records like I was searching for IEDs in Iraq. And boy, did I find some buried treasure. Turns out Meadowbrook Estates was built using something called overlay zoning. Sounds fancy, but here's what it really means. The county let Bradley build his subdivision while acknowledging that existing properties kept their original zoning rights. Our ranch maintained its agricultural exemption, grandfathered from 1952. Karen's neighborhood was basically built around us, not over us. But the real bombshell was in the original county planning meeting minutes from 2019. Bradley Whitfield himself argued that keeping the ranch would add rustic charm and authentic character to the community. He literally used our ranch as a selling point to buyers, then sent his wife to harass us out of existence. I called Nolan McCarthy, our family attorney, and a guy who's been fighting property battles since before Karen was born. Retired county prosecutor knows where all the legal bodies are buried. When I showed him the documents, he started grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Son," he said, "you've got them dead to rights, but let's do this properly." We ordered a new professional survey using the original 1952 boundary markers. Iron Pin's grandpa drove himself still there after 70 years. The results were beautiful. Not only was our agricultural exemption rock solid, but Karen's precious community entrance, with its fancy stone pillars and HOA signs, was built 15 feet onto our property. 15 feet of illegal trespass decorated with their own violation notices. I filed the trespass notice on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Karen showed up with a county inspector demanding an immediate cattle inspection. She had this satisfied look like she was about to spring some trap. "Ma'am," the inspector said, looking confused as he reviewed our paperwork, "this ranch has been here longer than the county zoning office. Everything's in perfect order." Karen's face went through about 6 different shades of red. "That's impossible," our attorney said. "Your attorney was misinformed." The inspector cut her off. "Agricultural exemptions don't expire just because someone builds houses nearby." That's when Karen made her first real mistake. Instead of backing down gracefully, she got personal. I don't care what some dusty old papers say. I won't have this neighborhood turned into some backwoods cattle operation. I'll make his life miserable until he sells." The inspector actually took a step back, threatening harassment in front of a county official. That's admitting to a crime. But my favorite part of this whole mess was Roosevelt's reaction to Karen's car horn. Every morning she'd drive by and honk, trying to spook the cattle, I guess. But Roosevelt, being a bull with opinions, would position himself right at the fence line and just stare at her Mercedes. Not aggressive, just judgmental. The neighbors started bringing coffee to watch the daily staring contest. Mrs. Rodriguez called it better than cable TV. Here's something most people don't know about property law. Agricultural exemptions don't just protect your right to farm. They actually give you special legal standing against harassment. When someone tries to force you off agricultural land using residential zoning rules, they're essentially attempting theft of protected property rights. The takeaway: never assume new zoning laws override old property rights. Grandfathered protections often trump local ordinances. As Karen drove away that day, spinning her wheels and throwing gravel, I knew she was going to escalate again. The morning mist was rising from the creek, carrying that clean smell of wild mint and fresh water. It reminded me why 3 generations of Stones had fought to keep this place. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get one. Karen's next move proved she'd learned absolutely nothing from round 1. 2 weeks later, the HOA voted to improve community drainage by redirecting our natural creek flow. Their excuse? Ranch runoff was creating mosquito breeding hazards that threatened their children's safety. Pure garbage, but clever garbage. Karen had done her homework on environmental regulations and found a bureaucratic angle to attack us. She hired contractors to dig a diversion channel on HOA property, claiming it was preventive flood control. The sound of heavy machinery digging at dawn told me everything I needed to know about Karen's respect for neighborly courtesy. Diesel fuel mixed with disturbed earth, creating that sharp industrial smell that doesn't belong in ranch country. But Karen wasn't done. She filed a complaint with the state environmental agency claiming our cattle were polluting the waterway. Then came the social media campaign. Ring doorbell footage edited to make our gentle cattle look like rampaging buffalo, posted with captions like "Protect our children from agricultural runoff." Here's where my Corps of Engineers training came in handy. I know water rights law better than most lawyers, and Karen had just walked into quicksand. That creek has been running through Stone property since before Texas was a state. Our homestead deed from 1952 includes something called riparian rights, legal protections for landowners adjacent to waterways. These rights don't disappear when someone builds houses downstream. More importantly, any creek diversion that affects water flow to existing users requires consent from all riparian rights holders. Karen's contractors were literally violating federal environmental law, one shovel full at a time. I spent a weekend documenting the natural watershed using mapping techniques the Army taught me for combat engineering projects. Took water quality samples upstream and downstream of our ranch. Guess what? Our water was cleaner than what was flowing out of the subdivision, where lawn fertilizer and storm drain runoff were the real pollution sources. Then I made some calls. The Texas Water Development Board doesn't mess around with unauthorized creek modifications. When I explained that an HOA was attempting to divert natural water flow without permits, their enforcement division got very interested very quickly. The environmental impact study they required revealed something beautiful. Karen's planned diversion would actually flood 3 houses during spring rains. The engineering was so bad it threatened the very neighborhood she claimed to protect. Now, here's a knowledge nugget that saved my ranch. Riparian rights are some of the strongest property protections in American law. They often supersede local zoning because water law predates most municipal regulations. The simple rule: Water rights run with the land, not with zoning changes. 3 days after I filed my complaint with the state, Karen received a cease and desist order. $10,000 per day in fines until the diversion was filled in and the creek restored. I was standing in my workshop when she got the news, and I swear I heard her scream from half a mile away. But the real victory came when the state water inspector showed up. Professional guy, been doing environmental assessments for 20 years. He took one look at our operation and started asking about our conservation practices. "You folks are doing everything right," he said, watching our cattle drink from the creek under the shade of 70-year-old oak trees. "This is how sustainable ranching is supposed to work." Roosevelt chose that moment to wade into the shallow water, cooling his massive bulk while dragonflies danced around his horns. Creek stones worn smooth by decades of natural flow clicked together under his hooves, a sound my grandfather had heard, that my father had heard, that I'd grown up with. The inspector wrote in his report that our ranch operation actually improved local water quality through natural filtration and erosion control. Meanwhile, the subdivision storm drainage was introducing fertilizer runoff and road chemicals into the watershed. Karen's environmental complaint backfired so completely that the state recommended our ranch as a model for sustainable water management. They even suggested the subdivision adopt our conservation practices. But here's what really burned Karen up. The local newspaper picked up the story. Local ranch praised for environmental stewardship, while HOA faces fines for illegal creek modification. The article included a photo of Roosevelt drinking from the crystal-clear creek, looking like the king of the countryside. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me 3 copies of that newspaper, grinning ear to ear. "Mijo," she said, "sometimes the good guys do win." The evening quiet was particularly sweet that day, broken only by natural sounds, cattle lowing softly, creek water flowing over stones, and the distant sound of contractors filling in Karen's illegal drainage ditch. Karen was about to learn that when you mess with Texas water rights, Texas water law messes back. Karen's third assault came through the city code enforcement office, and this time she brought backup. Multiple citations arrived in my mailbox, like legal cluster bombs, unsafe barn structures, improper vehicle storage, fence height violations, and my personal favorite, operating an unlicensed auto repair business because I fix neighbors' equipment in my workshop. The code enforcement officer was a guy named Dale Kruger who showed up wearing pressed khakis and carrying a clipboard like it was a holy relic. Everything about him screamed, never worked with his hands. He measured fence heights with a tape measure, photographed every tool in my workshop, and documented tire wear patterns on my ranch truck like he was investigating a murder. But Dale's visit revealed something interesting. Every single violation referenced residential building codes, requirements that don't apply to agricultural structures. My workshop, built to house heavy equipment, was actually safer than most suburban garages. The barn, constructed with techniques my grandfather learned building Army Corps projects, could probably survive a tornado. Here's where Karen's city background betrayed her again. Agricultural structures are exempt from residential codes under state law. My buildings were built to agricultural standards, which are often stricter than residential requirements because they have to handle heavy machinery and livestock. While Dale was busy measuring things that didn't matter, Karen was spreading rumors about my military service. She'd somehow found records of a disciplinary action from my deployment. What she didn't mention was that I'd refused an illegal order to falsify engineering reports in a combat zone. The Army backed my decision, but Karen presented it as evidence of anger management issues and failure to follow civilian authority. The neighborhood social media went crazy. Posts warning about a dangerous individual with military weapons training living next to their children. Karen even claimed I'd threatened her with violence, which was news to me since our only interaction had been that first encounter at my gate. But here's the thing about military training. It teaches you to document everything. I had security camera footage of every encounter, recorded timestamps of every violation notice, and detailed logs of every harassment incident. When Karen's accusations reached the county sheriff, they asked for evidence. 20 minutes later, they were apologizing for wasting my time. Meanwhile, I was digging into Dale Kruger's background and found some fascinating connections. His consulting company had received a $5,000 payment from Whitfield Development just 2 months before my citations began. Municipal records showed Dale had used the same violation tactics against 3 other properties that Bradley wanted to acquire. The pattern was clear. Identify problem properties, harass owners with frivolous code violations, force expensive legal battles until they sell below market value. But Dale made one crucial mistake. He demanded engineering certification for my barn roof, apparently not realizing that I am a licensed professional engineer. When I provided my own certification, he demanded an independent assessment. That's when I called in a favor. My buddy Marcus Schuyler was visiting on leave from the Army Corps, and he happened to be a structural engineer with federal licensing. Marcus took one look at my barn and started laughing. "Garrett, this building's over-engineered by about 200%. Whoever built it knew what they were doing." "My grandfather," I said, "learned construction building corps projects during the war." Marcus' official federal engineer certification trumped any local code enforcement authority. Dale's clipboard suddenly looked a lot less impressive when faced with actual expertise. Here's your knowledge nugget. Municipal code enforcement officers often don't understand the difference between residential and agricultural building standards. Agricultural structures are typically built stronger because they handle heavier loads and harsher conditions. The simple takeaway: know your zoning classification and what codes actually apply to your property. The community response was shifting, too. Mrs. Rodriguez organized what she called coffee klatch intelligence networks. Basically, neighborhood ladies sharing information about Karen's tactics. Turns out Karen had approached the feed store owner trying to get ranch suppliers to boycott me. She'd pressured our veterinarian to drop us as clients. She was systematically trying to strangle our operation economically. But small-town loyalty runs deeper than HOA threats. Doc Martinez, our vet, told Karen exactly where she could stick her demands. The feed store owner, Vietnam veteran who'd known my family for 40 years, suggested Karen might want to find a new place to buy her fancy lawn fertilizer. The morning smell of fresh coffee at these neighbor meetings, mixing with the old wood scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen, reminded me why rural communities stick together. We look after each other because out here, your neighbors aren't just people who live nearby. They're your lifeline when trouble comes calling. Karen was about to learn that attacking one ranch family meant taking on the entire community. 3 weeks into Karen's siege, I decided to dig deeper into our property history. Something wasn't adding up about how a subdivision got built so close to our boundaries without triggering easement disputes. So, I drove to the state archives in Austin, requesting every document related to the original stone homestead. What I found changed everything. Grandpa's 1952 deed included a clause I'd never paid attention to. Mineral rights, not just oil and gas, but gravel and stone quarrying rights to the entire property. Texas Hill Country is built on limestone, and quality building stone was valuable even back then. But the real bombshell was in the survey maps. The original Stone Creek Ranch included 25 acres that were never officially transferred to the county. Due to a clerical error in 1987, the county had sold land to Bradley's development company that they didn't actually own. Those missing 25 acres included the current HOA Community Center, the fancy entrance with its stone pillars, and half the subdivision's main road. Karen's HOA had built their entire common area infrastructure on land that still technically belonged to my family. I sat in that archive reading room, surrounded by musty documents and the smell of old paper, trying to process what this meant. The county had sold property without clear title. Bradley's company had purchased land they couldn't legally obtain, and Karen's HOA had invested $800,000 in facilities on property they didn't own. Here's how title law works. You can't give what you don't have. When the county sold our 25 acres to Bradley using a quitclaim deed, they transferred only whatever ownership they actually possessed. Since they never legally obtained our land in the first place, Bradley got nothing. The technical term is defective title, and it invalidates every transaction that followed. Nolan McCarthy's reaction when I showed him the documents was priceless. This 70-year-old attorney actually jumped out of his chair and started pacing around his office like a prosecutor who just found the smoking gun. "Son," he said, "they're not just harassing you. They're living on stolen land." The financial implications were staggering. 25 acres of prime developed real estate worth approximately $2.4 million at current market rates. The HOA had unknowingly invested in improvements to property they'd never legally acquired. Their insurance policies were void because you can't insure property you don't own. More importantly, all of Karen's liens and violations against our ranch were legally meaningless. You can't encumber someone's property when you don't have legal standing to file complaints in the first place. But here's where it got really interesting. Texas law requires continuous property tax payments to maintain ownership claims. I drove straight to the county tax office and pulled records going back to 1952. Stone family had been paying taxes on all original acreage every single year, including the disputed 25 acres. The tax assessor, a woman who'd been there since dirt was invented, shook her head when she saw the documents. "Honey, this is the kind of mistake that keeps lawyers in business for generations. Your family never stopped owning that land. The county just forgot to tell anybody." This wasn't just a harassment case anymore. This was potentially systematic fraud involving a county government, a development company, and an HOA that had been illegally formed using defective property titles. I drove home thinking about irony. Karen had spent months trying to steal my ranch through legal harassment, never realizing she was living on land my family actually owned. Every violation notice, every fine, every threat had been coming from people with no legal authority to make them. Roosevelt was waiting at the gate when I got home, probably wondering why I looked like I had swallowed the canary. "Big guy," I told him. "We just found our ace in the hole." The next morning, Nolan and I spread maps across my kitchen table like generals planning a campaign. Coffee brewing, legal documents everywhere, and the sweet smell of revenge in the air.